Good day, everyone. Today we'll be talking about the energy flow in ecosystems. According to the first law of thermodynamics, energy can be converted from one form to another, but cannot be created or destroyed. These three pictures show practical examples of how energy is transformed from one form to another. On the leftmost part of this slide is a picture that shows how chemical energy from the muscles of a human being is being transformed into mechanical energy that helps move the bicycle's pedal, and eventually the bicycle's pedal turn the wheels of the bicycle. The one in the center shows how wind energy is being transformed into electricity. On the rightmost part is a picture that shows how animals such as this goat transform chemical energy from the plant into energy that lets it move its muscles and thereby helps it wander around and survive. At the same time, we all know that plants produce their own food by converting the energy from the sun into chemical energy. And that process is called photosynthesis, wherein in photosynthesis, light energy is being transformed into chemical energy, and that energy is used to produce carbohydrate molecules, and most of these are in the form of glucose and other organic molecules, which is needed for the growth and development of plants.
The amazing process of photosynthesis. A look around at nature is an absolute treat to our senses. We all enjoy the colors and fragrance of plants, but seem to forget about their important contribution. Plants are an absolute necessity for life on Earth. It is so because of the process of photosynthesis. A closer look at a plant shows that it is firmly held in the soil by the help of roots. These roots absorb water from the soil and through the tiny tubes transport it to the stem and then to the leaves. The stem holds the leaves in such a way that they absorb maximum energy from sunlight. A leaf is a very important part of the plant. Photosynthesis, the ultimate provider of food and oxygen, occurs in the leaf. A leaf consists of a flat, thin lamina, which is joined to the stem by a petiole. The flattened lamina provides large surface area for trapping sunlight. A cross-section of the leaf shows the upper and lower layers of cells, which are flat and irregular. Below the upper layer is the layer of tightly packed cells. These cells have specialized organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain the pigment chlorophyll, which gives the green color to the leaf. The next layer has loosely arranged cells with large air spaces. The section also shows tubes specific for transporting the absorbed water into the leaves. The lower layer has many pores called stomata. Each stoma is surrounded by two guard cells, which regulate opening and closing of the stomata. A leaf absorbs carbon dioxide from the environment through these stomata, which, after passing through air spaces, enter into the chlorophyll-containing cells. Both water and carbon dioxide molecules are finally absorbed by the chloroplast. These chloroplasts also have the capacity for trapping energy from sunlight, and this energy is used to synthesize glucose and oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. These oxygen and glucose molecules diffuse out of the chloroplast. The glucose is transported through other specialized tubes to all parts of the plant, aiding in their growth. The oxygen present in these air spaces diffuses out through the stomata. So, during photosynthesis, oxygen is given as the life-sustaining gaseous component of the atmosphere, while glucose or food is transported to all parts of the plant and used for growth. To summarize, green plants can make their own food by the process of photosynthesis. Plants are held in the soil with the help of roots. These roots absorb water and send it to the leaves through specialized tubes. The lower layer has many pores called stomata. A leaf absorbs carbon dioxide from the environment through these stomata. Both water and carbon dioxide molecules are finally absorbed by the chloroplast. Where in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight, they synthesize glucose and release oxygen. The oxygen diffuses out through the stomata. The glucose is transported through other specialized tubes to all parts of the plant, aiding in their growth.
From this, we can find distinctions between the different organisms in an ecosystem, and they can be subdivided into two: the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. The autotrophs are organisms which obtains its energy and carbon from around them. So basically, they make their own food. However, on the other hand, heterotrophs are organisms that gets their food which is already formed from the environment. So for example, a cat eating its food, which is a rat, which is already a preformed organic molecule, or a human beings who eats their own food, which is in contrast to autotrophs such as trees or other plants who gets materials, raw materials from around it and transform it into energy and food through the process of photosynthesis. The process of photosynthesis is interchangeable with the term primary production, wherein primary production is the production of organic compounds from carbon dioxide. So when plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and through photosynthesis it produces organic molecules in a form of biomass which forms parts of its body. That is an example of what we call as primary production. And the ones who process this, or the organisms who does this, are called autotrophs, or the primary producers. And these are the organisms responsible for primary productions. Examples of this in terrestrial ecosystems are plants, such as trees, grasses, etc. And in aquatic ecosystems, the primary producers are mainly the algae and phytoplanktons, which are eaten by heterotrophs such as fishes and other sea animals. So let's try to familiarize ourselves with these terms. First is gross primary production. The gross primary production is the rate at which an ecosystem's producers capture and store a given amount of chemical energy as biomass in a given length of time. So meaning, this is how fast or how slow a certain producer is able to capture, say, carbon from the atmosphere and then turn it into what we call as biomass. Biomass being the amount of living organisms in an area or in an ecosystem or in an organism itself. Meaning, if we say how much carbon is found or organic molecules are found in a certain organism, we can refer to it as the biomass. So when we hear the word biomass, it means how much is stored in a form of carbon or other organic molecules in a living organism or in the whole ecosystem in totality. The net primary production, on the other hand, is the rate at which all the plants in an ecosystem produce the net useful chemical energy. When we say net, that is already the difference between the rate in which the plants produce useful energy from the gross primary production minus the rate at which they use some of that energy during respiration. Meaning, not all of the energy is turned into biomass because there's a certain energy used by the plant for respiration. So the difference between that is what we call as the net primary production. Both of these, the net primary production and the gross primary production, are measured in units in terms of mass per area per time. So for example, in terrestrial ecosystems such as a forest, we can measure its primary production in terms of mass of carbon per unit area per year. So for example, grams of carbon per square meter per year. So that's the amount of production of a certain forest has. So this is the most common unit of measurement for primary production. So every ecosystem has its rate of primary production, and that is measured in terms of the amount of carbon per area per year. Another term is what we call a secondary productivity, and this is what happens in heterotrophs. Secondary productivity is the rate of production of new biomass by consumers or heterotrophs. For example, when a certain animal eats its food, perhaps an animal or a plant, it is able to convert the organic materials from their food into a new biomass for itself. So it turns into muscles, or it turns into skin, parts of skin or tissues, and so on. So meaning it is like just the repackaging of energy which is already found in producers or other animals. So no energy is being introduced into the food chain, but it is only repackaged. This repackaging is what we call as secondary productivity. Another term we have to be familiar with in terms of the flow of energy in ecosystems is what we call as the trophic levels. So the trophic level is the number of steps in which a certain organism is away from the food chain. So, for example, a food web starts at trophic level 1, and trophic level 1 refers to the primary producers or the autotrophs. One step higher up is level 2, which are the herbivores, which refers to organisms who eats autotrophs or plants. And on the third level are the carnivores, and these are the ones who eats the level 2 organisms. And on top of it all, in the trophic levels, as what we call as are what we call as the apex predators, which sits at the level 4 or 5. So apex predators are the ultimate organisms who are animals which are not eaten by other animals, and these are called the apex predators. Examples of these are sharks in the ocean, or maybe eagles in terrestrial ecosystems, and so on. One way to better understand also on the flow of energy in ecosystems are what we call as the food chain. The term food chain refers to the sequence of transfers of matter and energy in a form of food from organism to organism. So if you look at this figure here, we see the arrows represents who eats what and who is eaten. What is being pointed by the arrow refers to the one who eats. And the origin of the arrow are the food of that particular organisms. So if you look at plants here, plants are eaten by small herbivorous mammal, which is a rabbit or maybe an insect, herbivorous insect such as a grasshopper. And both of these are eaten by larger predators. For example, the small herbivorous mammal such as a rabbit is eaten by a fox or a wolf perhaps, or a snake. And at the same time, these snakes, which are considered as large predators, are eaten by larger predators such as eagles. And eagles here represents the apex organisms. Or maybe the grasshoppers are also eaten by the snakes or other predatory arthropods such as spiders. And these spiders are eaten by small predators such as birds, in this particular case an owl, and so on. And eventually, all of this, once these organisms die, they turn into organic materials because they are fed upon by what we call as detritivores or the decomposers such as fungi, bacteria, or earthworms, which turns them into basic organic materials such as waste products or dead matter or debris, and eventually into more basic nutrients, which will then be used by plants for them to grow and develop also. And the cycle goes on, what we call as the food chain. So you may be asking, what's the difference between a food chain and a food web? A food chain follows in a linear matter or one line path of energy and materials between the different species. A food web is more complex, so it's an interconnection of different food chains, and the organisms are placed into different trophic levels. So if you look at this particular diagram, on the left side is a food chain where we show only just one path of energy. An herbivore eats plants, and the herbivore is eaten by a carnivore, and this carnivore, which is a rat in this particular example, is eaten by another carnivore, which is a snake, and the snake eventually is eaten by an eagle or a large bird. So that's just one path of energy, meaning one linear association among the different organisms. On the right hand side, we see an interconnection. This is composed of different food chains, which we call as a food web, meaning all the possible energy paths, because one organism may be eaten by 3 types of organisms, or 3 types of organisms is eaten by just one organism, and so on, and this creates an interconnection, what we call as a food web. Another thing to consider is in the flow of energy in ecosystems is the second law of thermodynamics. The second law states that the transformation of energy always results in some loss or dissipation of energy, meaning every time energy is passed on from one organism to another, a certain amount of that energy is being lost along the way, meaning not 100% of the energy that comes from a certain organism is being transferred to another organism when it eats that particular organism, meaning a certain amount of energy is lost along the way. So this leads us to the term called ecological efficiency. So ecological efficiency refers to the efficiency in which the energy or the biomass is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So every consumer at each level convert an average of only about 10% of the chemical energy in their food to their own organic tissue. Meaning, if a certain organism eats another organism, only 10% of that is converted into biomass. The rest is being spent and being lost along the way. So that's how efficient, that's the term efficiency among organisms in an ecosystem. If the average is 10, if you are lower than that, then you are less efficient in terms of using that energy. If it's higher than that, let's say you can be able to convert around 11 to 12% of the chemical energy from the food and turn that into your own organic tissue, then you are more efficient than the average organism in an ecosystem. But if it's lower than 10%, you're less efficient, meaning you waste more energy compared to the other organisms in an ecosystem. And another concept we should understand with regards to energy flow is the energy pyramid. Energy pyramid is a pyramid of energy which depicts the energy flow or the productivity of each trophic level. So if you see this diagram, we always see that the most productive organisms are the producers. They have to be, because the whole ecosystem depends on them, without which all the other trophic levels falls down, right? Because it is the basic trophic level in an ecosystem. So meaning the pyramid has a larger base and a smaller apex. So it means there are more plants in terms of biomass. There are more biomass composed of plants compared to biomass of fauna or animals. And the lesser biomass in an ecosystem refers to the tertiary consumers or the apex organisms, and not the other way around. Because if there are more eagles than plants, then eventually that ecosystem will fail in the end, because some organism won't have enough food for them. Okay, so this sums up our lesson for the energy flow in ecosystems. Thank you very much for listening.